Welcome to this episode of Kennedy Saves the World. And today I have some help saving your MTV. MTV is 40. It's hard to believe. For those of you who were around when it started, maybe you didn't have cable. Maybe you couldn't even see it. We didn't have cable until I was like 15. So we didn't actually have MTV in our house for, several years. And I'll never forget friends who had it, trying so hard to angle for sleepovers at the few friends' houses I knew who actually had MTV, and we would stay up all night watching Duran Duran videos and all that stuff. And obviously, I got to MTV in the fall of 1992, and a lot changed for the network then for a couple reasons. One, they became very political, and they started the Choose or Lose campaign with Tabitha Soren and Kurt Loder, and they documented the 1992 presidential campaign, and that was a huge insertion into politics and the marriage of politics and pop culture as MTV helped to usher in the Clinton era. Feel about it how you will. And the other big shift at that very point, not just musically, because I guess there was a third, was the introduction of reality TV into the MTV lineup. And that's when The Real World launched in New York. And they didn't have any plans. It wasn't produced. There was nothing set up. They didn't really know what they were doing. It was just a bunch of people in a loft in downtown New York hanging out, arguing, trying to figure stuff out. They had no idea how famous they would become and how legendary that show would become and how it would change the landscape, not only for MTV, but for all of reality TV. And, you know, there are a lot of people who have been associated with The Real World throughout its history who have become phenomenal superstars. Two of them happen to be friends of mine. One of them is my coworker, and they are married, and they're awesome. They're the Duffys. So Congressman Sean Duffy, who is right now retired, he was on season 7 of the lame Boston season. Not my term, his term. And his incredible wife, Rachel Campos Duffy, was part of the San Francisco season. And that season was probably the most emotional thing I had ever seen at that point on TV, because it was unscripted. It was intense. There was mental illness. There was physical illness. And they lost a great cast member. And Rachel was there for all of it. And she has built this incredible broadcast career. She's now the co-host of Fox and Friends Weekend. Welcome to Kennedy Saves the World, Duffies.
Kennedy, it's great.
Wow, that was such a great recap too.
Really
like
was.
I feel like I really journeyed through MTV history. It was awesome.
And that we have a little sliver of saving the world with Kennedy is actually so cool. And you're right. Kennedy, my season was lame. Rachel's was iconic, right? This is Puck and Pedro, and someone getting kicked out of the house, and someone with AIDS. And by the way, can I just make one other point that I didn't have a TV in my house, not cable, no TV in my house until I turned 18.
Oh, wow.
So my exposure to MTV came from other people's house that actually had TVs and had cable. That's how deprived I was.
How old were you when you got on Real World season 7?
Like 24.
Okay, so you really didn't have that much exposure to MTV before you got on.
So for me, I would see the marathons, right? Those who had seen this show, we had marathons where they would play every episode back to back for like 24 hours. And so I was in undergrad and law school, and on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning after you had been out the night before, sitting on the couch, we'd watch these marathons of the show. And I would actually watch Rachel, who I didn't know at all at the time, and didn't know I'd meet her and didn't know I'd marry her. I would watch her season.
That's amazing.
I remember watching the famous season of Miami, and I randomly applied. And yeah, it's a wild experience. And like you mentioned, MTV was in this situation where they didn't have a big budget. They wanted to do some kind of programming, and so they figured, how do we have, with our low budget, a product that we can put out? And they thought, well, maybe we put 7 strangers in a house, film them living, and maybe we can make a show out of that. And it became The Real World.
Yeah, and the producers who did it, one came out of Mary Alice Bunham, came from the soap opera world, and John Murray, which is Bunham Murray Productions, he came out of more of a documentary background, and together they were able to come up with this, drama plus reality concept. And it's really transformed the way I love reality TV. Sean will know he'll pass by me in the kitchen. I love to cook and watch The Housewives.
I love The
To me,
Housewives.
it's
I get stuck with that.
Love 'em.
It is the most.
I can't stand how much I love them.
I can't stand it either. I'm so glad you say that, because I used to feel guilty about it, and then I would read the Camille Paglia, social commentary articles, and feel like, okay, it's not so bad that I'm learning about women all over our country through this horrible guilty pleasure. But my favorite thing to do to relax is to cook with the Real Housewives in the background. And Sean, of course, will pass by and go, I can't believe she's watching that shit. And
you'd rather talk to the housewives than me.
I love it
And
so
maybe you'll be a Real Housewife of Wisconsin at some point. I know reality TV it runs through your veins. So Rachel, how did you get on the show?
Well, yeah, it's really interesting. Can I just say also that with MTV in general, I was living overseas when MTV was sort of just getting going in the 80s. So I would get videotapes of, people would have videotapes who were back in the States, and they would send them to somebody who's living on a base. And then somehow you would get a copy of a copy of a copy of somebody just playing MTV for the day.
Because
and
you'd
that's how
you'd never seen anything like it. And
No,
it's funny because so many people early on, you had to sneak it. And, they had to find ways of breaking through constantly. But it's really interesting because it was such an important shift turning to reality TV, because it was an experiment. Yeah. And, like you said, this incredible marriage, the Buna-Murray marriage of, the two worldviews and the two views of TV, how those combined to make something that, changed MTV and got a lot of eyeballs in the same place at the same time, which was their big challenge. Because when I was there as a VJ throughout the day, we had a really hard time keeping eyeballs on during the day part. So my boss at the time, the senior vice president of programming, Andy Schoen, he had the idea of breaking up the hours into specific genres. And they had never done that before. So they had MTV Rocks and UMTV Raps. And, throughout the day, it's sort of breaking up the show. So if you were a rock fan, you knew to watch from 2 to 3. And, they had pop music on throughout the day. And then Alternative Nation, my show, was on at midnight. And, they got some eyeballs. But when it really changed was that long form programming. So how did you apply, and how were you cast, Rachel?
So I had seen just a few segments of New York and of LA cast. And then I was in my dorm room with one of my friends, and I saw, MTV was playing, and I saw a commercial that said, apply, send in your tape. And they literally told you when you would be taping, which would be from January to June of this,
Where were you in college?
I was at Arizona State University, and I was a December grad who had nothing to do precisely during that time until grad school was going to start for me in the fall. And I had already had a scholarship for that. And I knew I was going to UC San Diego. So I had this, period of time where I had nothing to do. And I thought, I was like, of course they're going to, I'm going to apply because I believe in fate. Right. And then it's like, I have nothing to do during this period of time. And so I sent in my tape. Little did I know, 45,000 people applied, and they only picked 7. I didn't know that at the time. So I sent in a tape. I had a friend in the broadcasting department who helped me put something together. And, it was like a series of 7 different steps until it ultimately, they would give you a call. They'd make you set up a video camera in your dorm room, at a certain time, and they'd call you, and then you'd have to tape yourself as they're calling you and then send that tape in. Anyway, it ended up culminated in going to LA, and they had a meeting with you and all the executives. And then they said, go back to your hotel and we'll call you at 3 p.m. And that night, my brother, who was a Marine, was living close by, and I went partying with him and I.
For the full podcast, go to foxnewspodcast.com.